how do you build wealth? How do you preserve wealth? How do you now transfer that wealth to the next generation?
Yeah, you own the business and you're the key driver, but you may have one or two individuals that, God forbid, if they don't show up,
A partner can also deceive that spouse and be like, hey, the business is only valued $50,000. Here's a check for $50,000.
and we told him that he should think about putting an insurance policy in place to protect his son, a life insurance policy and a critical illness policy. And he expressed a little bit of surprise of why we would be asking him to do that.
Vince, thanks so much once again. We've talked quite a bit about personal financial planning. I mean, whether it be some of the basics of it, but in general, how do you build wealth? How do you preserve wealth? How do you now transfer that wealth to the next generation? Let's dive a little bit into business owners, entrepreneurs.
Sure.
A lot of business owners and entrepreneurs in my community, especially. I work with a lot of business owners and entrepreneurs. And the reality of that is a lot of these entrepreneurs, they're focused on one thing and one thing only, which is 24/7. They're focused about how do you grow your business? How do you make sure that the business is successful? Nobody really takes a quick step back to, think about things like, hey, God forbid if something happens and if my revenue is interrupted, how is the business going to survive at the end of the day, right? I know you've had many of these discussions because I know over the years you've actually helped a lot of business owners. Talk to us a little bit about wealth building, preservation, and transfer, but with the angle of business owners. What do they need to look after?
Well, exactly. The premise is the same. We're just replacing the concept of personal/family with business. If I'm sitting down with a business owner and I want to have him think about financial planning for his business, same principles. We're looking at ways that he can build his business, preserve his business, and ultimately transfer his business. Building his business, easy. That's what he's concentrating on, the sweat of his brow, the hard work. But asking him questions such as, is there a key employee that is part of your organization? Yeah, you own the business and you're the key driver, but you may have one or two individuals that, God forbid, if they don't show up for whatever reason, they get sick, they get ill, they pass away. How did it affect your business? Can your business sustain? They're your key people. What are you doing to protect your key person? And there's such a thing as key person insurance. Partnerships. Chen, you and I, we can form a business and we're concentrating on building our business. And we're 50-50 partners. And we've put no thought into, God forbid, Chen, if something was to happen to me and I was hit by a car, well, you just gained a partner. You gained my wife as a partner. She's a fantastic lady. You guys might even get along, but the last thing you'll probably want to do is have my wife try to tell you how the business should be run. You should be thinking about, how can I buy her share of the business? So when we talk to partners, they have put no thought into partnership agreements, buy-sell agreements, and that's something about preserving the business. Businesses pay tax. You work so hard, you don't want to draw out that income because you have to pay tax, so you keep it in retained earnings. And the retained earnings are invested and they're growing, but unfortunately that growth is causing tax implications, and worse, that growth is considered a passive income, and the more passive income you make, the higher your tax on your active income. So a good financial planner shows ways of having your company be able to, say, purchase an insurance policy and move assets that are in retained earnings into that vehicle and have it grow tax deferred. And then finally, as we spoke about earlier, about the family cottage, your family business, you built this business, your hope is that you wanted to pass it on to your children. And not realizing that there's going to be a tax bill on the capital gains. And even having some people think about, well, I want to pass on the business to my family, but I only have one child who's interested in taking over the business. I have two who don't have any plan. Well, is it going to be the proper, fairest way to distribute where I give one child, my whole business, what am I going to do for the other two children? And so talking to a business owner about estate equalization. So when it comes to building, preserving, and transferring your business, the same principles apply, which is, are you having discussions with a financial planner who can build a plan, a document to have you think about these topics and putting plans in place?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you sort of gave a full, complete 360 view of this. So let's break this down a little bit. And I think you and I would agree at the end of the day, like the building of that business, usually sort of the owner ultimately takes the ownership of that aspect. That's something that they have a vision for something and they want to make sure that vision lives on at the end of the day, right? And I often ask the question when it comes to sort of the preservation of that business, can your business live without you? For example, in the sense that, God forbid, if you have a major diagnosis of an illness and you need to take a year off from that business, whether it be you or a key person you may have, if you guys don't end up showing up to the business, who's actually going to be carrying on that vision of that business at the end of the day, right? That's the first thing that sort of comes to my mind. The second part of it is, whether you like it or not, your fixed expenses, whether it be your rent, whether it be your payroll expenses, all of those kind of things still has to be, paid, whether you're here or not, whether revenue generating activities are being made or not at the end of the day, right? So really from a wealth preservation or a business preservation perspective, we really want to make sure you're building a lot of these assets because you're putting your sweat and equity to build it. And oftentimes business owners, the few things that I've sort of been told is it's not just their income now, that's not their only hope, but it's also like if they don't build it the right way and if they don't preserve it the right way, their retirement could be impacted significantly just because they rely on the exit of this business as sort of their retirement income at the end of the day, right? So we want to make sure we protect that aspect of it. And you said something, very truly and dearly. Unfortunately, I've been dealing with one of this, within one of my own clienteles or a new client that I'm taking on. We have a buy-sell agreement, and God forbid, if we don't have a buy-sell agreement, if you and I are partners, and if something happens to me today, you unfortunately have to deal with my wife as a 50% shareholder of that new business at the end of the day, right? Or of the business. She may not have no idea of what that business means, but you're going to have to listen to her whether you like it or not.
Exactly.
And the second aspect of that particular transaction is, if I was to think about it, I'm not saying you, Vince, but just in general, a partner can also deceive that spouse and be like, hey, the business is only valued $50,000. Here's a check for $50,000. And you know what? And she can buy them out at the end of the day, right? So unless there's a shareholder agreement and a buy-sell agreement provision or clauses within that shareholder agreement, it makes it super difficult to make sure that we can the hard work that your spouse has put in to build that business, with that the chances of preserving it becomes very difficult if we don't have these clauses and agreements. That being said, it always leads me to an interesting conversation. Funding mechanism. Where's the money going to come for some of these things, right? And I've had discussions with lawyers. I'm like, hey, you guys talk about making sure business owners have these agreements, but nobody talks about where's the money coming from. I mean, let's say the business is worth $500,000 or $1 million. And if somebody needs to buy out my spouse for $500,000 or $1 million, let's be realistic here. A lot of small businesses, medium-sized businesses, they don't keep $1 million of cash in this.
It's in equipment, it's in machinery.
Exactly. Where's the money going to come from, Vince? Based on what you've done some planning for a lot of business owners, what are some options in terms of where the money can come from to be able to fund these solutions?
Well, a lot of times they're going to try to ask for a loan at a bank. A bad time to be asking a bank for a loan is when there's been a death of a key partner.
Right.
They're going to be wondering, why should we give you the money? The best place where the funding should come from is an insurance policy.
Got it.
Because you're pennies on the dollar. And as you rightly put, most businesses just don't have that liquid cash. You can sell machinery, you can sell some of the assets you have, but then you're having to pay taxes on the sale of those assets. And in essence, to come up with $1, you're trying to sell $1.40 of an asset.
Right.
The magic of an insurance policy to fund it is that to come up with $1,
Yeah.
you normally got to just spend 30 cents.
Exactly.
And so my experience has been the best place to fund a buy-sell agreement is through buy-sell insurance.
Perfect. So just really from a preservation of business, whether it be individual business owners, whether it be a key employee, whether it be a couple of partners, but really making sure that we have the proper necessary agreements in place, the funding solutions in place to make sure that we are able to protect the business and preserve the business. Exactly. And then of course you talked about the transferring of that business. Just like the family cottage in a family circumstances, business ultimately becomes the nest hood for a lot of people. They spend their hard-earned time, energy, everything else, in building that business. And you want to make sure when the transfer of business happens, when you exit the business, ultimately, there's a big capital gain implication that's involved. And whether you like it or not, even if it's going to your kids, for example, CRA will deem that on the date of your death, the fair market value of the property or the business was deemed to have disposed at the fair market value at the end of the day, right? And whether you like it or not, your terminal tax return, we're going to have to make sure that there are tax implications and be able to cover that. And whether it be through a life insurance or not, we need to make sure we plan for those things. I know with business owners, we talk quite a bit about whether it be a family trust, whether it be a holding corporation. There are different tax implications for some of these things because there are benefits like lifetime capital gain exemptions that small business owners or qualified small business owners can get. But at the same time, if you want to preserve that asset, if you want to protect that asset, some of those things may not help to be able to own those shares individually. So we always will take those things into consideration. And you brought up a valuable point. I think estate equalization, I think that's a very, can you touch on a little bit more about that concept one more time, if you don't mind?
Yeah, you know what? Ideally, in a perfect world, when you have a family business, you're going to pass it on to your kids, the next generation. But in reality, it's very common where not all of your kids are going to be involved in the business.
Yeah.
You may have had 3 children and one's decided that they want to come on and work with you and take over the business, but the 2 may have different interests. One may have wanted to be a lawyer or an engineer or a photographer. And if your goal is that you are going to leave your business to the child who is in the business, well, you're giving them an asset worth $1 million or $2 million. And you're going to have to live with the fact, well, what am I doing to compensate the other 2?
Absolutely.
You want to be fair.
Got it.
And so we call it estate equalization, where you pass on your business to the child who's interested and qualified to take it over.
Right.
But you make sure that you had a fair and equal distribution of an estate by purchasing an insurance policy of equal value to your business.
Amazing.
And having that be what's
amazing
designated to your kids. And that way you leave with the peace of mind of knowing that you've maintained the business to the most capable person, but done the rest of the estate in a fair, equal manner.
And you ultimately made sure the family harmony remains intact at the end of the day, right? And that's important to make sure when we look at that aspect of it. And of course, I know you've done this. I know we've talked about business owners where they have a ton of money in their retained earnings because they don't want to take it out. There's plenty of solutions out there for us to be able to make sure we structure certain types of insurance policies where we are able to access that money out of their retained earnings, obviously in a tax efficient manner. So I know we touched about various different solutions for business owners. As we sort of wrap up this discussion, whether it be financial planning or business succession planning in general for families and business owners, talk to me a little bit about a success story or a memorable experience that you've had, coming out of clients, and how they've been significantly impacted positively based on the planning work some of your advisors and you have done in the past.
Well, I think in general, I get a lot of satisfaction of knowing that I managed in my 35 years a group of advisors, and I think of all the good advice that they passed on to their clients and what we were able to do. But the one that's most memorable, the one that touches me, we actually did some financial planning, but for an actual advisor who was in our office. And he had a son, his firstborn. And we went up to him about a week or 2 after his son was born. And we told him that he should think about putting an insurance policy in place to protect his son, a life insurance policy and a critical illness policy. And he expressed a little bit of surprise of why we would be asking him to do that. And we always said, well, you have to believe in what you're advising clients. And the best way to believe in that is to
100%.
be an owner yourself. But we did indicate that what I told you earlier in our chat, life happens, and not talking about it doesn't prevent it from happening. And so he took our advice and he purchased a policy, a life insurance policy on his son and a critical illness on his son. And about 3 years later, his son developed a rare blood disorder, life-threatening blood disorder. And it threw the family for a loop. And so much so that they instantly tried to create a GoFundMe page because they were trying to raise money to see if they could find a donor.
Right.
And we kind of looked at and said, hey, what are you doing? Remember years ago we told you to put a plan in place, and the critical illness policy, one of the covered conditions was the blood disorder that his son had. And we were able to give him and his wife a check for $100,000.
Wow.
And his wife was able to be off work. The last thing that you want to be doing when you've just been told your son's diagnosed with a potentially fatal blood disorder is trying to work to meet the bills. She was able to take a leave off work. She didn't have to worry about the income. That's where the money came in. The great news is that a year later, they were able to find a donor. It was actually through the birth of their second child.
Wow.
But I just remembered the peace of mind of knowing that at the most difficult time in their life, faced with what would be every parent's nightmare, we were able to give them a check. And it wasn't what the check represented in terms of value, it was what it represented in terms of the ability and freedom to take time off work and focus on the well-being of their child. And I guess because it involved a 2-3-year-old boy, that's the one that still sticks out to me memorable. That, just little bit of advice, making somebody think about something for a while that they didn't want to, protected them going forward.
Amazing. No, that's very touching, Vince, and I know it's not an easy conversation at times, because oftentimes parents might also get very offended if you talk about having some of these protections for children, because nobody wants to benefit from something of their thing. But I think that the reason you've given absolutely shows the powerfulness and the impact of some of these coverages. It's not because we want to benefit from an illness of a child, but it's more so, can that provide you the peace of mind to be able to take time off work, not worry about any financial constraint that this is going to bring down on your family, and to help make sure that child or even yourself, you guys are able to recover peacefully and health-wise without having to worry about finances. And that's the power of making sure you have the right financial plans in place, whether it be from an insurance perspective, investment perspective, emergency fund, regardless of which aspect of financial planning is important for you particularly. It's important to make sure you have that conversation, you document it. And one of the things I always tell people as we sort of wrap up the conversation, don't let this be a document where you sort of set it and forget it for the rest of your lifetime.
Exactly.
You're going to have life-changing events, whether it be, leaving a job, coming into a new job, kids coming into play, retirement kicking in, a death in the family, a divorce or even a separation, a birth of a new child, a wedding or marriage aspect of things. Bottom line is life changes, so should your financial plan evolve, and you should be making sure those changes are sort of happening on a yearly basis or semi-annually at the end of the day, right? So make sure you have a sound financial plan in place, and make sure as you sort of, as life changes, make sure you're making those changes according to that as well.
I can't stress enough, it is important to create a plan, but it is important that you sit down with your advisor at least once a year and review the plan and make any changes that are necessary.
Absolutely. Vince, with that, I just want to thank you for your time, obviously, for coming into our show and then being able to sort of highlight your experience, from a financial planning perspective, holistically, and then answering all the questions.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure. As you can see, I'm passionate about educating individuals, and I got to credit you for having chats like this that create awareness. Maybe
Absolutely.
Somebody's watching this and thinking, maybe I didn't want to have that conversation, but if this makes one more individual want to have that conversation, it's
Absolutely.
time well spent.
Absolutely. Thank you, Vince, once again,
Chen.
and thank you, viewers, for turning into our show. And we'll be back next week or next time with another episode with another expert. Thanks so much.